As you can see from this page, a possible brainstorming concerning the problem of the industrial age would imply words such as industry, technology, machine, production, transport, manufacturing, but also process, engine, steam power, water power, transition. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution took place in Great Britain, in particular in England. Now, we're gonna give reasons why this phenomenon occurred in England and it couldn't be anywhere else. So, let's discuss why the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. First of all, we have to consider new ways of working. Before the Industrial Revolution took place, that is, before the middle 18th century, most products were handmade, that is, were manufactured. With the Industrial Revolution, there was a great increase in machine-made goods instead of handmade products. The revolution began in England in the middle 1700s. Let us consider why this happened at that age. First of all, the agricultural revolution. It paved the way for industrialization. In fact, in England, there were wealthy and great landowners, but also smaller farmers. Well, with the so-called Enclosure Act, the government allowed wealthy landowners to buy and then enclose great fields, large fields of land. And once these farm fields had been bought by these wealthy landowners, they could put fences or hedges to enclose them. This meant that poor farmers had to quit and move to the new industrial towns, the new so-called mushroom towns, which were spreading all over England, especially where new factories had been built. So these farmers, these countrymen, moved to the industrial towns, they changed their lifestyle and they became factory workers. Now let us focus on the causes of the Industrial Revolution one by one. First, the dramatic increase in the population of Britain. The population grew from 10 to 42 million people in just 1 century and a half. So there was a need, an urgent need for larger production. The attitude of British people, of English intellectuals and scientists. In England, people of all classes were willing to accept changes. For example, millions of farmers and countrymen moved into the new mushroom towns to work in the new factories, using the new machinery that they had never seen before. What kind of materials were used in these new factories? The so-called raw materials, especially iron, coal and tin were used across Britain in the new factories. And the new machinery and factories needed a lot of these raw materials. Even cotton became important because the first factories were generally textile factories which needed a lot of cotton. Cotton was either produced in England or it was imported from abroad and manufactured into goods, into cloth and clothes, especially in the north of England, that is Manchester, Chester, and Liverpool. Transport had started to become more and more important. New canals and the first railways had been built across Britain, connecting the key industrial towns and the countryside. Railway stations were built in most areas of the country for the first time. Travel became quicker and cheaper and easier. Transport carried weights of goods and resources. We'll see that later. Even the transportation of people will be possible using trains. Another important factor was related to money, to banks and the banking system. Banks in England were confident that they could lend money, all the necessary money, to start a new business, a new industry, a new factory. There was more money available for the rich, and especially for those inventors who invested their money on new machineries, such as the engines. Agriculture and farming. We already mentioned the so-called agricultural revolution. Farmers, especially the new great landowners, those who had enclosed their lands, had the money to invest on new ways of growing crops and breeding animals. This was important because the population had been growing dramatically, so there was a huge need of food. Farmers made use of new machinery which was steam powered, and so they could increase their production even further. All this was possible because Britain was at peace. Although Britain was fighting to gain land from other places, other continents, to make its empire larger and larger, in England there was a relative peace, a state of peace that other European countries had not yet reached, especially France. This condition of peace made it possible for Britain to enlarge its empire, acquiring new colonies. Why were these colonies so important? Because the Industrial Revolution was based on trade. So colonies made it possible to obtain as many raw materials as possible at a very low price, and they were also a possible market where the English capitalists could sell their goods. So it was very important for an industrial country as England was becoming to have to count on a great empire, on a lot of colonies, and England came to acquire a huge empire comprehending India, Australia and East Africa. Britain could get luxury goods such as tea, spices, gold, silk from these places, which also became marketplaces for the British factories. The Industrial Revolution was definitely made possible by the new inventions. that is, ways of applying science to improve everyday life. And the most important inventors of the time, such as James Watt or Alexander Bell or Thomas Edison, were all born in Britain. James Watt was the inventor of the steam engine. Alexander Bell invented the telephone, and Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. It doesn't come as a surprise that all these inventors had British origins. This has a lot to do with the British way of thinking, which is essentially based on empiricism. Now, we do need to understand the difference, the opposition, empiricism versus rationalism. According to empiricists, knowledge is based on experience and on experimentation. Experimental science is the new paradigm of knowledge. On the other hand, according to rationalism, knowledge could only be based on the use of reason or logic. Mathematics is the paradigm of knowledge. Trustable knowledge is only certain if it is based on mathematics. Experience will never produce certainty and does not conform to reason. So, all kinds of knowledge based on experience have to be considered second-class knowledge. So, to sum up the causes of the Industrial Revolution: raw materials had become available because of the colonies of the Empire, the British Empire. These colonies also became marketplaces for the goods produced in the factories. Great Britain gained political stability, which made it possible to invest money on these new businesses. Parliament supported free enterprise, and banks were willing to lend money to the new capitalists. The Enclosure Acts and the Agricultural Revolution forced a lot of country people to move to the new industrial towns, so they became the new factory workers. Britain was the home of empiricism. It's not a surprise that a lot of inventions were made in Britain. Empiricists are ready to consider science from a practical point of view. They turned science into technology. This is the core of the Industrial Revolution. The new inventions made it possible to have steam engines, water engines, which were applied in the textile industry at first. And finally, let's have a look at the effects, short-term effects and long-term effects of the Industrial Revolution. These new machines were labor-saving, time-saving, but this didn't mean that for factory workers life was easy. In fact, they had to work up to 16 hours per day. And we must not forget that even women and children were employed in factory working. The working conditions in factories were often poor. The new factory workers moved to the industrial towns, which spread like mushrooms, and that's why they are nicknamed mushroom towns. But These workers often lived in overcrowded houses. The environment started to become polluted. There's this new phenomenon, pollution, a new word, smog, which means smoke and fog. Water became polluted. Factories polluted the same water which was used for drinking, for cooking, and for washing. The main consequence was the rise of the middle class. The middle class became by far the most powerful class in England.